Good morning again. The live stream is up and running in case, or it supposedly is, it's telling us that it is, so we should be good to go. And yes, if you give me a second, I'll grab that YouTube link and put it in there. All right. Here we go. Thanks everybody for logging on to FILO Workgroup meeting number 3. Let me get our...
Are we recording?
Yes, we are recording.
Yep.
We are live, so we're all good. I'm going to share my screen just so we can see the pretty pictures instead of our faces. All right. So once again, hope everybody's doing well. Appreciate your time this morning. Just a reminder, we are the Kentucky Wetland and Stream Fee in Lieu of Mitigation Program, also known as FILO. And we have our primary objectives: restoring protected habitats, increasing outdoor recreational opportunities, clean water, of course, prominent among those, and a nice nugget of economic growth comes along with that. So this is meeting number 3, today on December 10th, having had 2 previously. Just a quick note, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback outside of the actual meetings, other than with the presenters. So I just want to kind of put a little prompt in there for everyone to actively participate. And please reach out to us with any ideas or comments. And just real quick, I can see the names of everyone, but a few of those are just phone numbers for me. I just want to acknowledge who's here and who's not. I've got a 919. I'm pretty sure that is a member, the Corps of Engineers staff, and a 315 number as well, and I'm not sure who that is. If you want to know who you are, please, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we'll just roll on. Thanks for joining us. All right, today we're going to cover just a brief update since our last meeting. We will be hearing from Kentucky Home Builders Association to get a permit D perspective. We also will be hearing from Ecosystem Investment Partners to get the mitigation bank perspective. And we'll follow that up with hopefully lots and lots of wonderful discussion for productive engagement forward, maybe get into some objectives, and when we want to have the next meeting, we'll try to go ahead and throw down a week for that, but we'll get to that near the end. At this point in time, before we dive into the Home Builders Association's message, I'd like to invite the commissioner or deputy commissioner, if they would like to say a few words to kind of kick us off here once, really getting in here. So Brian, if you or Rich are on, I'd love to hear from you, if only just to say hello.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. I just wanted to thank everybody for your continued participation and helping us to share information and identify needs to enhance the FILO program going forward. And thanks to all the presenters who've made time to share your background, your experience, your expertise. And thanks to our FILO team as well for helping to lead this effort. And we trust it will be productive for everybody involved, and hope that it's clear that we want this to be, an open dialogue, and then also produce some specific action points or recommendations that could be taken to help us all, improve the delivery of FILO going forward. So thanks everybody for your participation.
Great, thank you, Brian. Now we'll move on without any more silliness. But we're very happy to have someone from the Home Builders Association with us today. I know that they are very active throughout the area, but definitely in Northern Kentucky at this time. So we have, I believe, Brian Miller, and I'll give him the floor. So Brian, just before you dive in, would you like to share your screen, or would you just like to speak, or I can turn off my screen share and make you really large? What would you like to do?
I can just speak. I do have some notes up for myself, but nothing necessarily to share in the way of a presentation today.
All right. Well, then we'll just hang out here and you let us know what you got.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Like was said, my name is Brian Miller. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Building Industry Association of Northern Kentucky. I'm happy to represent the Home Builders Association of Kentucky in this endeavor, and I want to thank you all for allowing us to speak today. Specifically in Northern Kentucky, we represent not just the home building industry and their appurtenant businesses in the way of residential construction development, but we also represent commercial and industrial builder developers around our region. And we've been engaged in this endeavor back since the Great Recession, specifically as private projects have been impacted by costs associated with stream and wetland mitigation. And over the years, the temperature from our membership has been increasing as fees have been increasing associated with these projects. Specifically, when we look back in the areas prior to 2010, when a lot of these regulations came through and began impacting our development community, in 2009, we were buying permits on the AMU basis of about $170 an AMU. That increased slightly in 2012 and 2013. And then noise really began increasing with regards to the feedback from our development community to us around 2014, when we were nearing $300. And then quickly we went through 2015, 2016, where cost per AMU is around 470, which increased the volume feedback from our membership. And now we are upwards north of $500 per AMU. So overall, there's great concern by our industry, not just at the cost of AMUs, at the level that they're at now, but also the availability of credits, understanding that Northern Kentucky is probably impacted from the private developer standpoint more so than most of the state. I believe we're about 30% more dollars into the program than, say, Louisville, and about double that of what you'll find in the Lexington market for about a 10-year total. So if we go through, and that's leaving our largest purchaser out of those figures, which is the Amazon Prime Air Hub. That's a special project we've kind of set off to the side from our evaluation, and that is probably maybe a once in a lifetime project. But if we were to take the credits that were purchased for that individual project and take those out, we still stand at a very high rate, again above about 30% of the total purchased credits over a 10-year cumulative period compared to Louisville, and again double that of about the Lexington market. And we've been working with Fish and Wildlife and with our elected officials and our appointed officials here in our region as well as NKU to try to overcome some of the challenges that present itself. And one of the biggest challenges we have is lack of available projects that are on the ground to carry out these mitigation projects, to bring those to the market. And so I had a brief discussion with Mr. Porter a couple of days ago, and where we find ourselves compared to other states in the country is that we really have a small group of organizations and agencies that are involved in these projects. If we look out and compare ourselves to states such as Georgia or North Carolina, there seem to be a plethora of private banks that are moving into those states or have existed for some time in those states to bring projects to the fore. So last count we had, there was about 15 plus private bankers operating in the state of North Carolina. If we look at a corporation like Weyerhaeuser, who's a large operator in the state of Georgia, I believe that they had in process and in place, last time we counted, was north of 22 projects in the state. And so some of the challenges that we see are not just the pure amount of dollars going towards credits, but also our topography. So Northern Kentucky is a very challenging terrain. A lot of the good land, and I'll say good land, it's probably better termed as easy land, which is more flat land, has been developed already. And so we're left with more hilly terrain. And while our residential developers can do things to try to avoid streams, our commercial and industrial developers largely can't. So the size of the buildings and what's going on in our region right now is we are awash in logistics centers. Wayfair, a couple, 2-3 years ago, completed a project on a 1 million square foot building. There's a speculative building in the market. It's about 3 million square feet. It's currently absorbing some occupancy. But if you imagine that size of structure, and logistics centers require an awful lot of impervious parking and stormwater facilities in order to abide by regulations having to do with stormwater, there's not a lot left over on these parcels. And so we get in this situation where permittee responsible mitigation is becoming complex and challenging. And then the changes with the mitigation rule within the last decade have caused some challenges as well, where we have inverted the top 3 hierarchy of projects that are, or project types that are preferred, where we've gone top line FILO, second line on-site, third line off-site. And then coupled with that challenge is the economic reality that land in the urbanized area is pretty expensive. So we've been working with NKU and the Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, as well as other elected and appointed officials in our region, to try to identify owned lands to bring to the market. We've also been working with our sanitation district to develop a model to try to bring credits to the market. But all this takes a great amount of time. And in the language of our members, especially in the commercial industrial space, time kills deals. And so if we're looking at 3 years for projects to come to reality, a lot of those times companies or operators from outside of our market are making binary decisions as a yes or no, whether they're going to move into Kentucky to do business. This is, and I will point out, this is one of a myriad of hundreds of decisions that company owners have to make when considering our estate to open operations. But just this one alone is very, very complex. So one of our greatest concerns, again, is not just the cost of the credits, but also the availability of credits, understanding that we are basically out and have been out for some time. So we end up in a scenario where the development community is forced to buy credits because the regulator or the project manager are forced to deliver credits on a speculative basis. And so I'll equate that back to building a house, which is the language that our members speak. Could you imagine trying to have somebody buy a house and you don't have one, and you've got a model of what a house could look like and a set of plans, but you don't know what things are going to cost. And unfortunately, that's a little more of a reality today with the material prices in operation in our folks' world than what it was, say, 2 years ago. But you have to be able to quote the price out in order to cover any unknowns that you could possibly foresee. So the project managers that have to deliver these projects have got to price these things with a heavy set of contingency calculations and have to put them forward in order to cover any potential contingencies that may occur through the process. And so as a result, to deliver that project that doesn't exist yet, it's a very expensive proposition. Compounding the issues, we've had a recent stay of the Trump era water protection rule, and that has driven the cost for the commercial industrial builder developer community substantially. Anecdotally, we've heard recently about a 300,000 square foot building just lost a deal on an operator because the prices were driven up over $250,000, and the operator of the logistics facility couldn't make the numbers pencil out. So they've chosen another market out of state to move their operations. And then the change in the water protection rule has also compounded things for our residential community. After the initial change during the Trump administration, our residential developers, which were for a period of time did not have to consider ephemeral streams, were able to avoid most other streams. And so they got into a period of time where they were able to go through the permitting process. And like we do in our region, most homes are built on ridge tops. A lot of walkout basements where they basically hang the house off the ridge top and they have an exposed foundation on the rear wall, allowing for a walkout basement. But now that we have ephemeral streams back in the mix, it's compounded the issue and has begun to slow new development. We had a period of time where our residential developers were finishing out lots and communities that they had started prior to the Great Recession, but that lot count has pretty much been absorbed. And for a short window of time during the Trump area water protection rule, they were able to go through permitting processes and bring new communities to the table. But with change recently, with stay out in Arizona, that's ground down to a halt. And so our folks are left to go back to the drawing board and focus on small lot communities and infill situations almost solely. And then we end up into the scenario we find ourselves today where our commercial industrial operators are simply just losing deals, as I stated before, was one of a myriad of considerations that an operator has got to consider as they bring a project for consideration into our marketplace. And so some of the solutions that we hope to have identified is the wish to bring more projects and more operators into the market from out of state, to create an environment here where these private investment groups could bring more projects into our state and provide more options. We see competition as a good opportunity. Our members have to deal in the competitive space on a daily basis, and the consumer always benefits with good competition. And our industry being the consumer of available mitigation credits, we would think that same principle would extrapolate to us, and that our membership and the development community would benefit from good competition in the mitigation world. So with that, we covered a number of things. Permittee responsible mitigation on commercial industrial sites is very difficult. They would not mind doing offsite mitigation. I know that we've recently gone through a readjustment with our service area, and that is expanded for FILO projects, which may result in some win-wins. I know that we've got a number of projects that are in process right now, but not approved, but hopefully will be approved in the coming future to bring new projects to the market. But we sure could use an awful lot more. So, in closing, we believe in a clean environment. We would like to do our job to help not just make sure that we've got these stream projects moving forward, but we also would like to take an opportunity to get a little bit innovative with this too. We have had on-site mitigation projects done by private residential developers, and they thought they had done a good job. And in plain English, like our members usually speak, there were no fish, and now there are fish, and they don't feel like they're getting proper credit for it. So that's where our folks stand, and they'd like to go down that road and experiment a little more. Our industry are a group of problem solvers, and they would like to be able to have good partnerships to where they help solve these problems. And hopefully, if you see out of Northern Kentucky, is a good partnership with the regulators and the regulated community working together to try to bring a plethora of projects to the market, because we sure could use them. So with that, I'll stop. And we have a ton of data. I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide more information, but I don't want to take up everyone's time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was really, really insightful and well put. You've got a very good perspective and a handle on what's going on, and especially in Northern Kentucky, but as a permittee in general. So your perspective is very appreciated. I'd like to kind of open up just a minute if anybody has any questions for Brian, and encourage those, because I think he's got a wealth of knowledge that we'd like to flesh out here if we can.
Brian, let me start it off. Can you kind of give a 10,000 foot thumbnail sketch of how your members have seen the development from across the state? I know Northern Kentucky and Louisville and the Golden Triangle area is really specific, but historically, say since going back 5 to 10 years, how have you seen the need for credits for your members throughout the state, from Eastern Kentucky to Western Kentucky? Is there any type of trend, or are they just hotspot specific, or what are you seeing?
It's well, you got a good use of a word there, which is hotspot specific. We see a large demand from it in the metropolitan areas. We have a greater awareness now than, say, prior to 2014, 2015, where these prices really jumped up. We go back and look at these project reports, and it's been kind of unknown to the community at large, not just the development community, but just the general citizens of the Commonwealth. A lot of these projects have been happening for years, and nobody really knew about them until they really started impacting the development community. And the transportation cabinet and utility companies are probably the largest purchasers of these credits. And then after 2009, when regulations changed and they really started impacting the private development community, become a heightened sense of awareness. Now, I will say that you asked for the 10,000 foot level analysis. What we've seen as a result of these processes, we had a land development council and had a plethora of small developers, and there were doctors that would go in and 4 or 5 of them buy a piece of property. Other people in other professions would get into the development business. But as a result of these regulations, we've lost almost every small developer. It really has resulted in very large companies being able to afford these regulations and being able to employ engineers, both in-house and independent, to be able to deal with them. Most of our folks that are small developers or who had been small developers are awash in paper already, or now digital filings, and they just don't have the capacity and the bandwidth to comply with what's required of them. So the marketplace result has been that these mega developers or very large home builders and more elaborate commercial industrial builder developers are the ones that are surviving this. That's just the free market response to this regulatory reality. But what we hear on a regular basis, especially in the urbanized markets, are one, the cost of the credits, and two, are there available credits? And so we get regular updates on a monthly basis from our developers who are literally out hunting and pecking to try to find out where available credits exist. And they do price their product accordingly. Obviously, you know, they just don't go out and write a check out of their own pocketbook and say that's done. We just spent more money today. All of this goes down to the ultimate user. So that's the way that the economic market works. Whoever is the home buyer or the company operator or the lessee of a built space is ultimately going to be the entity that has to pay for this, because these companies have got to survive. So you have to have a certain level of profit margin in order to maintain and to move your company forward. All these companies are answerable to shareholders. And so ultimately, it's the end user that ends up paying all this. It's just, in the plain language of our members, it's just a tax. People just don't know about it yet. Anytime that you price, and this is data that is provided by our senior economist at our National Association of Home Builders, and it's very market specific. So they do a market study of over 300 markets within the nation. Anytime, and this is Greater Cincinnati specific data, but anytime that you increase the cost of a new home by $1,000 in the Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky market, you're pricing out 1,362 families. And as you can imagine, in our industry, it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. So, you know, we're right now in a major dialogue about workforce housing. We just had a discussion yesterday at our local Chamber of Commerce about it. They're taking positions on it. Our elected officials are all concerned by it. I had mentioned earlier that the predominant companies that are moving into our market are logistics companies. And the wages for these jobs have definitely increased in order to try to draw people in. But as Amazon continues to build out, and then, you know, they've got about 3,000 workers now, I think they'll probably eclipse that 5 times over when they totally build out. We're all in the competition space for workers, and we had to have a place for them to live. So you've all heard stories about the increase in housing. We refer to it as attainable housing. And it's not just attached product or condominiums or homes for rent, but we're trying to deliver to the market homes for the workforce. And it's practically impossible to do right now to be able to deliver a product that is at or under $150,000. We do benefit from the fact that our market, when compared to the rest of the country, is affordable. We do have folks that are moving in from, as a result of the pandemic, from other portions of the country, your New England states specifically, that do find homes here more affordable, given what their income is generated out of those states. But if you have a native Kentuckian in our market that is getting into the workforce, they're predominantly going to have to exist in rental housing or a home of a relative right now in order to begin building wealth and moving down the pathway of their career and their livelihood. So there's a lot of market realities that exist as consequences of the regulated community's need to deliver a clean environment. But to answer your question specifically, there's two questions that we hear about predominantly, and one is the cost of AMUs, and two, the availability of credits. And at times we do hear reports back from our membership that there are simply no credits to be had, and it literally draws future development to a trickle.
And does that vary service area by service area, or is it from what you're hearing general about no credits being available? Is that, well, we know what the situation is in Northern Kentucky because our inventory is sold out. But are you hearing that in other regions of the state, or is it just primarily in the Triangle?
It's primarily in the triangle. What we hear in most other portions of the state is just the sheer cost to be able to play in that space. They are experiencing the same issues that we are, and it's an experience that we have around the entire country. Just kind of fill in this gap here. I also serve as our Executive Officers Council National President with the National Association of Home Builders. So I do have the luxury of being exposed to my counterparts across the entire country and regularly talk to our senior officer leadership, to our builder developers across the nation. And they are experiencing one of two things. In a few markets are there unavailable credits, but in most markets it's the increased cost per AMU. So the costs are definitely driving things up, but they have a whole series of outside pressures outside of this dialogue here that this contributes to. And sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back scenario. You wonder which straw you're going to talk about today. But all straws are getting heavier and heavier. Nationwide, we're starting to see a home price appreciation slow. We're starting to see absorption of new homes slow. And also nationwide, we're seeing workforce housing issues. So it is becoming practically impossible to deliver single-family detached workforce housing across the entire country. Specifically, when you drill down to Kentucky, the cost is the largest subject around the state. But you are right in that Northern Kentucky, the largest dialogue is not just cost, but just plain availability of credits.
The last question I have, so I don't monopolize everything, is when the Home Builders Association or your members start looking at doing their internal calculus as far as having to do PRM, or whether your association has looked at doing just your own bank for making it available only for your members, what kind of calculus do you put into that? And is doing a developer specific or a home builder's specific bank a possibility?
We actually walked down that road once, but not in the stream and wetland space. It was with ESA regulations and the fact that we can do a mitigation program in the state of Kentucky with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But we started running the numbers on it. It would require pretty significant investment on our association's part in order to get into that space. We would much rather try to work to set up independent banks outside of us and work with those banks to try to extrapolate out a model that would be friendly with the development community. Neighboring states have done so. There's an organization in Ohio which worked in concert with the State Home Builders Association to create a foundation, and it operates very, very well. Some of the things that happen with these other foundations that do banking in other states is that, and I know we talked about this the other day, they operate under the principle that when these projects are complete and we've met the requirements for long-term maintenance of these systems, any leftover residual contingency money, and for those on the call today have probably got a pretty good idea, that is not a small amount of investment. That is a large ticket item, that those contingencies are largely returned back to the credit purchaser. So a lot of times and our community is always in the business of bonding a lot of things. So they bond streets. In some communities across Kentucky, they'll bond sidewalks. They'll bond other requirements that run in accordance with subdivision regulations across the state. So they're used to putting out some sort of bonding capacity and then recuperating that once these projects are finished. So that is not a model that's strange to our folks. What is a model that's strange to, if the money is not used for a project, it just continues to sit out there and is never returned. So we are interested in working with foundations that would either blossom up and be created in our state or come in from out of state that would align themselves with the realities of the development community better. But it is definitely something that we're interested in. I just don't think that as you mentioned the term calculus, I don't think the calculus is there for a 501c6 not-for-profit to be able to start that up with some sort of investment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess now might be a good time while others maybe are thinking of their questions that they might have for Brian. And again, I definitely encourage that. But I'll take a short moment to kind of give everyone the kind of the state of the state for the Northern Kentucky service area. We've got right now, I think 7 or 8 projects that the IRT has approved the concept on. Another 5 of those we have either under contract or have already executed the site protection instrument and are in the process of getting the permits or the mitigation plan developed so that we can get some of those credits released that you were talking about, so we can put those back available for sale. And if things go well, conservatively low, I'm hoping that's 5,000 to 10,000 here and upcoming in 22. But you know, if maybe we get creative, maybe we can advance some things and get that number up as high as we can, even higher than that. So those are things that we're working on. In total, we've got, I think it's 10 or 11 projects that are under developed, including those first, 5 or 7 I mentioned. So, the total build out on all of those is like 185,000 credits. And right now we were only allowed to sell 100,000. So if we execute the projects we're working on, or if we get them started so that we can execute them, we're without adding one more new project to it, we'll be able to develop, 85,000 more that, as those comes along. And as, you guys might recall from other discussions that we've had, those aren't released right away. So you're never going to release the credits as fast as you sell them. But, the more projects we can do simultaneously, the quicker those larger releases come. So in addition to that, we're working on have been and continue to work on avenues with the Corps of Engineers to see if we can increase those credit releases. Again, being creative, if we can do adjustments to our instrument to allow for just more sales, commensurate with the projects that we've found, and we'll continue to look for. So it's our interest in being available. And I know some of the people on the call or on the work group are sensitive to the final destination of those projects. Are they taken out of private ownership? Are they public ownership? Are they going to be hunted? Things of that nature. And so far, none of the projects that we have under development right now are poised to be exclusively a hunting and fishing, exclusive property once that's said and done. That's not to say that they couldn't end up there, but that's not our focus. We've been explicitly on, wherever we can do good mitigation, willing seller, willing landowner, willing partners, things that, fostering all of the positive aspects of it that we can. We're hopeful that we've got some good partnerships that we'll continue to foster with the local governments, and maybe increase some of their, maybe they're the end user to some of these properties. So that becomes parklands available that, near some of these neighborhoods that Brian's mentioned being developed. So all that's on the table as far as addressing your concern about having credits available. As far as the price of projects, it's real similar actually to what you mentioned. When you have a lot of unknowns, you have a lot of contingencies, those prices go up. And that's really where we're at in Northern Kentucky because of land costs. We haven't, that's a relatively new area for this program. We're drawing a lot on expertise of the Northern Kentucky University program, which is quite a bit smaller. And as far as costs go, our other projects, our heavy construction projects, as far as costs go, so it's not any higher than we don't want the price to be high, honestly. In other ways that we're trying to mitigate those high prices is with, there's a couple of ways. The most direct way is by doing the largest possible project we can find at a time, or combining multiple projects so that we get a largest economy of scale that we can as we work through that project process. And those are, the ones we've developed so far will be competitively bid as far as construction. And, multiple designers, design consultants that we have on those. So there's a lot of private contracting that's happening to develop these. The other thing I'll add, and it's, a lot of times it's a little hard to see, but because we're a statewide program, our financial structure is such that things like that long-term management, that end user that you mentioned, we do that throughout the state. And so those costs aren't property or site specific. We get to average those over all of the sites that we do for that long-term management. So there's a big economy of scale there for us as well. So, we're doing everything that we know of right now under our instrument and the procurement rules that we have to do this as economically as we can feasibly do it. So, absolutely, we welcome a lot, any ideas on that, and we may even get into some here later today, but just to kind of speak to a few of the major things that you mentioned as far as, available credits, the cost of each of those credits, and, that long-term end user of those sites. So those are things that the program is very aware of and very interested in doing to the best, the best benefit of the Commonwealth. So does anybody have any questions about that or anything else that Brian mentioned while we've got his primary attention right here? Like I said, a wealth of knowledge here, and I think he has a lot to help benefit us as far as reaching out to those that need mitigation credits.
If I could just make comment on the available credits and kind of balance that out with the needs of our community. What we hear back from our members is a moderate sized new residential community on average in our region would probably require about 6,000 credits. And so it kind of gives you an idea. We could open up 3 or 4 of those a year, given our current building permit data. So it's always kind of this chicken and egg thing with available credits versus what's actually out there on the market. And our folks feel like they're constantly chasing that credit market. And like you said, they may not be available today. They may not be able to be released. So there's always this workflow to where we have to stay in a real good, tight communication with all involved in this to not just see what's being delivered to the market, but to try to look 3, maybe 4 years out and say what the demand level is. And so given where we're at right now, we could see from the residential community easily 18,000, 20,000 credit needs a year. You get into the commercial space, and it's a commercial industrial space, it's a little different because everything's very site specific. There's a lot of deals going on around the airport right now. There's a CVG owned site that is going to be developed by Paul Hammer Company. And they are constantly taking tours back there and trying to come down to a number on what that's going to cost. And then, of course, as you know, given what is jurisdictional determination on a large site with these industrial sites could determine exactly what that credit need is. So we're trying to do our best to work with our stream restoration program group and the elected and appointed officials here in our region to make sure that we communicate that and provide a clearinghouse with not just available credits, but the potential need for credit absorption as we look through our spyglass three or 4 years out. But it takes everybody working together for sure.
Absolutely. Point well taken. And our numbers would be spot on with what you mentioned as far as, a good sized development in the 6,000 credit range. That makes perfect sense. And right now, our average mitigation site is around, just a quick look, probably 15,000 for one site, but we have them ranging from 6,000 to 40,000, depending on the site. So again, like you mentioned, just to corroborate with you that, it's very site specific, but that you would have a, even as low as 10 to 20,000 annual baseline for Northern Kentucky, just to let everybody know that would eclipse for a service area any other service area in the rest of the state, and in some years that of our data, the entire state combined. So just to have that active of a service area is its own challenge, in and of its own right, kind of unique in Kentucky, at least to that degree. And I'm sure that Catherine will have a little bit to add about that eventually, if she is not ready to right now. I don't want to steal any thunder because I know she looks at those same things, so I'm interested to see how that goes. So once again, I'll kind of pull us back to the group. Does anybody have any questions about what we've kind of touched on so far? No.
Brian, one thing I'll touch on in my presentation, there's a bunch of banks in the permit process and one that just got permitted in Northern Kentucky, which should be great for your members. To what extent are you guys in conversation with those banks, or is that of interest to be in more direct conversation with those banks?
Yeah, I think that, overall, we all should have a group dialogue. There, like I said, there is a working group here that meets, I think at least quarterly, discuss these issues. But given that there's such a great need, our folks are going to find a way to buy them. So if there's a marketable need for credits, our folks are out there scouring the ground to try to find places to buy them from. We do have one private banker that's worked here over the years, mostly for their own development purposes, but most of what they've released is pretty well done, with the exception of some small things here or there, and those were mostly wetland credits. So most of the things here that we get impacted by are stream credits. So if at all possible, if there's anything new in the way of new news, connect them with us, but also let's get them connected with our own stream restoration program committee that operates quarterly.
Yep, for sure. Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, one quick question. I know coming from my background from Louisville is that the MSD is under a consent decree, and I think SD1 is too. What discussions are in the works as far as alternative mitigation strategies for stormwater reduction and stormwater removal from development?
So SD1 has been a good partner with us recently, and over the last few years. We've actually proposed a pilot project to U.S. Corps of Engineers office to look at to look at storm retention programs that would help do two things. One, it would reduce. It's kind of a win-win to take a look at some retention systems in and around the first ring suburbs and urbanized areas, traditional urbanized areas, through a series of about, I think, 24 or 25 retention systems. That would be innovative in the fact that it has dynamic throttling of release of waters. So it would literally be SD1 staff sitting in a war room during rain events, able to actually dynamically throttle instead of just having a fixed outlet structure, which could help impact things. And then also SD1 is working with the Corps of Engineers. I believe has a proposal in front of them now. They've got to go inside of these creeks because they've got to go repair their sewer lines. And so the traditional model with our sanitation district has been that they go in and they just cover them with concrete. Well, it doesn't change the trajectory or the volume of the stream where these lines cross, and so eventually that's going to end up failing. And so they've recently gotten in the business of more stream restoration in and around sewer replacement projects, and are trying to work through the details with the Corps District Office right now, and not only to be able to do that remediation work, but also to qualify for credits themselves. We do have a recognition in our marketplace that even in our urbanized areas, we have done stormwater retention so well that there is a more beneficial uplift for more urbanized streams than you'll see in other parts of the state. And so not just SD1, but there's been a proposal and some talks inside of our restoration program committee. How can NKU or how can the department work with SD1 together? Because if they're going into a stream to replace sewer pipe, there's equipment in there already. How can we team up? SD1 has been taking that stance of shared services with our water districts. So if we've got duplicate equipment here, if we just have a backhoe on both lots and they don't get used an awful lot, how can we share a backhoe rather than pay for two backhoes? I guess all the way down to that level of detail. So that same principle is flowing through the leadership at SD1's way of thinking to say, okay, if we're going to go into a stream and disturb it and do work on the sewer pipe, why can't we share a project? Why can't we partner and go in together and have a win-win and a 2-for-1 situation to where the stream benefits, the environment benefits, we solve these sanitary sewer overflows in our consent decree. SD1 was successful in renegotiating their consent decree and adding 15 years to their timeline for completion dates. They've done other things like reworking their financing through bonds and they don't need the money right now, but to be able to refinance bonds at a much lower rate will be better for the future. So I think you have an environment where business and industry are working together with both the regulators and the regulated community to try to find these solutions together. And so we pride ourselves as a region within our state for great cooperation between both public and private interests. And we're all trying to work together to find those solutions. To answer your question, if there's any other innovative ideas that we're not working, and by no means do we hold ourselves up as an example for anybody, but if there is an answer out there that we could try to incorporate between the regulated and the regulators, we're all ears.
As those similar discussions where I know with MSD's consent decree, and I think they're reaching a milestone where they either need to renegotiate it or at least extend it. Have those similar discussions taken place with MSD?
You mean SD1? Yeah. So that consent decree was renegotiated. It was a 2025 deadline on about a $2 billion total price tag for the lifetime of their consent decree, and that's been pushed out to 2040. For their final completion date. And between that and a culture change to where their staff is very empowered right now to find solutions. They're operating a lot like our members do. They bring good ideas up from the grassroots, from within their own staff to try to find solutions. And what it's resulted in working with industry in cooperation with the public interest at SD1 to try to make these things happen at a much more affordable rate for the community. And as a result, this also has lessened the temperature directed at our sanitation district, because we don't see the 20% rate increases. We don't rate shock the community anymore. We've tried to find affordable solutions that achieve the end goal with bringing costs down. And so as a result, we just don't have the political ire that we had, I was going to say 6 or 7 years ago at our sanitation district, to where you didn't exactly look forward to going to work every day there. Now they're looked at as a partner. We look at them as a partner and a mate in trying to help us find solutions together. So to answer your question, yes, a lot of innovative solutions have come to the table, but like I said, by no means are we example for anybody. If there's any other innovative solutions, I don't have a position where I can speak for our sanitation district, but I was actually in a room with their executive director last night. I would say that we would be all ears in trying to bring those ideas to the fore.
Well, that's what I was wondering, is specifically for Louisville, because the Louisville MSD has just acquired the Oldham County system, and they've acquired the Bullitt County system, and they're looking at expanding into Shelby County to take some pressure off the Gist Creek facility because of the need, because of the distillery need in Shelby County. And I'm wondering if, has the association it sounds like you've made great progress up in Northern Kentucky, but has association members also reached out to Louisville MSD because of they've already got an existing wastewater, stormwater discharge regulations that their developers have to comply with anyway. And I was wondering, in partnering or having those discussions as MSD expands its footprint, is that something you all are actively pursuing?
Yes.
Okay.
That's great.
All right.
And I think everybody probably is, but just in case somebody on our work group here is not familiar with the one you mentioned, Brian, in Northern Kentucky, that's been in place for some time, which includes you and other developers and local government and the Northern Kentucky inlet fee program, which is exclusive to Northern Kentucky, nowhere else in the state, run out of the university there. And we've attended a few of those meetings, several, maybe a lot in the last couple of years, to try to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on there and how we can best integrate since this program has been available there. So I think that's a really good working group, and I corroborate what Brian mentioned there with that group and SD1. So that's a good group.
Yeah, we would definitely recommend, just by sitting down and meeting with folks. I mean, our working groups brought everybody to the table. We brought the district office staff over to meet folks, and we find that just by simply knowing each other better solves a lot of problems. So rather than just finding ghosts in the shadows and somebody to blame, if you can find somebody to reach your hand out and work with, we usually find a way to work through these problems together.
Yeah. Last thing I have for you, and this is to kind of a question about, because I know it's important to, and I don't think Judge Moore's on the call. I wish he was, but he maybe had a conflict today, I think he mentioned. But with regard to the price of a credit, and things like service areas and what are the priorities, I know there's a very big interest in keeping mitigation as tight to the Northern Kentucky impacts as possible. And I know the PRM sites, based on what people had to say about those, originally sounds like they were trying to do as much as possible on or very near site. Now maybe looking further away, like you mentioned, they'd be okay doing some offsite stuff. In our area is the same as, our service area is the same as Northern Kentucky University, the northernmost 9 counties. As you can imagine, and not even imagine. We just know the further you get away from the top 3 counties there, the Boone, Canton, Kimball area, the price of land is such a significant price, the component of the pricing structure. The further you get away, the kind of the lower it goes. You know, I think that there's an interesting sort of paradox there where we want those funds to be, you know, as near as possible to the people that are paying into them, you know, so you have that direct benefit. But is the value of getting something done and getting the permits and getting the development accomplished so much more that we just want the lowest credit price. We don't care where it is, kind of a thing, because, you know, right now, this minute, there's 3 service areas available depending on the vendor. The core standardized service area from Northern Kentucky is quite a bit larger than the inland fee service areas from Northern Kentucky. So I kind of wanted to get your impression on that. And it's not a loaded question at all. I'm not trying to, you know, to scratch an itch, so to speak, but I think it is a concern. So I kind of want to get your take on it.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you know, we supported the expansion of the service area. So yeah, we were 9 counties, and now we are in part or a whole, I think, 24 counties with that expansion. So we saw that, and we knew what the natural reaction was going to be, is that if you move further out, I mean, I've got a farm in Owen County, about 16 miles north of Frankfort. We own a portion of both Cedar Creek and Indian Creek. And I can tell you that the price per acre down there for hunting property is a lot less expensive than it would be if we bought a piece of property in Boone County. And it is a shocking difference. I think when we purchased land there, it was about $2,500 an acre. I think your property owners in Northern Kentucky would not even speak to you for anything less than $40,000 an acre. And at that CVG site that I just mentioned not too long ago, neighboring property, I believe it was about 100 acres, went for over $14 million. So that kind of gives you an idea of how the polarity would match up in the urbanized area versus the rural area. We knew that it was going to be a natural reaction for the water, for the dollars to have pressure to get lower. So, you know, I mentioned our working group. And so one of the things that we're trying to do to satisfy the wills of the elected officials in the area to keep that environmental improvement in the most immediate area and in the sub-watershed from where it's affected, what our priority has been as a group is to try to identify already owned properties. So we've worked with the local Boy Scout camp. We worked with local parks. And there are several projects that have been worked through, or at least estimated on those properties. But that's only going to take us so far. There's only so many public parks in the market. And then if you want to change that dynamic, then we'll be forced to look at things like transfer of development rights or purchase of development rights in order to set up environmental easements to pull these sort of projects off without unnecessarily driving up the cost through an outright purchase of major acreage. The one thing that could help that out is to take a look on how we evaluate property acquisition. Right now, I don't know if there's anything written into the regulations, but there's an ask when we talk about these things for the purchase of large tracts of acreage. We don't see anywhere in the regulations where that's required. Could we become a little more innovative and think about this differently and say, okay, from a stream's bank, could we set up an easement so many feet on other side and not require somebody to buy 200 acres? Could we put that in the conservation easement? Could we do that on private developed land? So if we had a 300 or 400 acre tract that was going to be developed into a residential development, how could we work with the regulators to identify these streams and set them aside, while at the same time understanding that in many cases for some homeowners, nature is a great amenity. And so how can we work together to set that up as a community amenity, make the environment a major feature of the community, and not set aside a 200 or 300 acre tract. Let's specifically look at the system in place in that developed community and how can we preserve that. The other thing that would help that out too, with regards to other regulated issues, is the concept of credit stacking. So it just so happens that we have to deal with ESA regulations an awful lot. And also just so happens that a great place for bats are streams. Like I said, I hunt my farm in Owen County, and it doesn't take a whole lot to sit out in a tree stand and figure out where the bats enjoy being. And the bats really enjoy being around streams. They really enjoy being around stock ponds. They really enjoy being around embanked waters. So if we could allow some credit stacking to establish some conservation easements in and around developed land, while still being able to get that environmental lift up in that regulated piece of ground, and maybe get away from the concept of purchasing large acre tracts, we might have a win-win both for the developers and the environmental community together.
Brian, just a quick. I'm sorry.
Apologize.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is George at Thanstech. So I did have just one question. I guess one for, Brian, for you. Just want to make you aware that Denver is looking into that pretty heavily as well. And I think they see the value of having those conservation areas, those restoration areas linked in with properties, with developments. And then you naturally see an increase in property value because, people want to live next to an amenity like that. So just Denver may be a community that you could model a little bit, what's going on in Northern Kentucky. And then Rob, a question for you. Mainly just want to get it out there because I think everybody understands this, but I'm not 100% sure. So Northern Kentucky University was running the inland feed program for quite a long time. Kentucky Fish and Wildlife just started to take it over recently, not take it over, but also operate in the same service area. When did Fish and Wildlife take that over? I think it'd be good for everybody to know that.
Yeah, it was maybe the middle of 2018 or near the end of 2018. So we've only really been operating there, even looking for projects for the last maybe three going on 4 years.
Right, and comment there is finding 185,000 feet worth of sites or AMU worth of sites in a 3-year period is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we've been very fortunate, admittedly. I mean, I was a little concerned going into it, and we really tried to beat the bushes, so to speak, before the big Amazon payment that Brian mentioned. So we were ready with regard to, what's coming down the line. Unfortunately, that one payment ended up being so large relative to our advanced credits that it put us in this sold out situation. That same effort of finding projects compared to had we, take that payment away, then we would still have credits available to sell and releases coming up in the same healthy market that would open the doors for banks as well. So it just is an unfortunate circumstance that there was one enormous need that ate up so much of the available advanced credits. And we're kind of stuck with that and living with it. So that's part of what we're trying to overcome. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the 185,000 credits of projects in that short of a time span that's really good for us. I mean, I'm sure that, it's a little bit different depending on where you are, but in that small area that, we're pretty excited about those and doing more. I would like to add to what Brian was saying, and Catherine, I know you got a comment probably about this too, but we're comfortable with conservation easements, really similar to what you mentioned. And we can do projects like that. It's a little heavier lift because you introduce more unknowns. There's a little bit more risk in a project like that, so that maybe the cost is a little bit higher. But certainly we are you know, on the table as far as looking at projects of that nature, you know, going into, you know, if a development area, if a developer owns a piece of land and they want to know, you know, how can I organize these homes around an easement, for example, you know, that as us talking to a landowner that's prospective for doing a conservation easement, a project, you know, we certainly could do that. You know, we're not really in a position to tell him how to do his development, but we could say, if we were going to do a project here and we're limited to a conservation easement corridors, what would that look like at a minimum? And could give him that information, you know, going forward on a site like that. So, you know, that's definitely something that we're happy to do. That's part of what we do anyway. You know, any landowner we go to that's interested in an easement, we'd be telling them those very things.
And that's one of the kind of purposes of this working group, is to generate the support and get it out there to look at ways to facilitate our contracting and procurement methodology that would allow us to put out a full delivery RFP that could result in the purchase and acquisition of a conservation easement. And in areas like Northern Kentucky, the ability to do that, that tweak to allow full delivery to result in the ownership of a conservation easement, I think that would be beneficial across the board. And that's one of the things that we're hoping this work group can explore, flesh out, and recommend.
Yeah. So sorry if we stole your thunder, Catherine. I'll let you.
You made exactly the point I was going to make, Rob. Thank you. Which is that from the Army Corps perspective, because I guess ultimately, right, whether the project is a FILO project, which ultimately has to be approved by the Army Corps, or whether the project is a PRM that gets approved by the Corps, or a mitigation bank that gets approved by the Corps, the Army Corps, just to be clear, is completely comfortable not with fee simple ownership, but instead with either deed restriction or conservation easement. So that's certainly something that could be done right now without any changes. Now, the procurement issue that Scott just raised, that's different, right? Whether FILO is able to buy a conservation easement interest, but in terms of private sector doing mitigation on land, doesn't have to be owned in fee simple.
Yeah. And we can compensate for those easements to a degree. I mean, it goes to the same appraisal process, but more specifically what Scott's saying is what we cannot do is the full delivery where we're able to contract up front, let the mitigation vendor handle the project, you know, and then end up with, you know, have that easement and then hold it at the end. We can't combine that easement holding with a full delivery procurement right now. That's our stumbling block. It's not that we can't procure the easement or the full delivery, we just can't do them together. So there's that. But so in all that, anybody else think of any fun stuff for Brian, or do we wanna roll on?
Rob, I would just bring up one other point, because you know, some of the discussion has been about trying to link where you have development, go ahead and do the restoration with it. You have equipment there anyway, why not do that? And what I would just say is, on the regulatory side, you know, the view tends to, you know, morphs over time. Right now, you know, there's that intention to try to have watersheds that are not developed, so that receiving waters coming in or runoff coming into the stream would not necessarily be coming off a developed site. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, there's more things here than just physically making that happen. But I, you know, over time, you know, if you're impacting a stream anyway, why not eventually encourage restoring that stream? And again, what we're seeing in Denver, Denver's looking really heavily about how can we encourage developers to, you know, use green solutions, use best management practices, go ahead and do the restoration while they're in there anyway, because it just makes sense. So, you know, hopefully the environment for that will get there, but it's it's more than, it's multiple fronts that we would have to get things aligned in order for those to come together.
Absolutely. And, not to skip over anything, you're exactly right. Like the regulatory, sort of trend right now is, in order to minimize risk, let's protect the watershed if we can. But I think, to something that Brian mentioned that SB1 is looking at with their, and Tom and Scott mentioned the stormwater improvements and things of that nature. If you can do that in concert with protecting a stream corridor or a wetland area, even if that is upstream, but you've got some, you've got that, I guess, legal protection like the easement, if that constrains some things about that neighborhood, for example, that's surrounding it. If you can combine all that stuff, like you're saying, it just has to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, essentially. If we can get there, I think the ability to the regulatory environment allows it. We just have to make sure we've attended to all of the appropriate things. And I think as far as the FILO program goes, I mean, we're certainly would be interested in helping fund or take on those projects, but which we'll see later in more detail maybe, but where we start stumbling is how do we then procure that effort? What are we able to do it, and how much can we work with that developer, or what does that even look like from a contracting perspective? I think the mechanisms are there from a regulatory perspective now. It's more about, we've accepted this obligation to do mitigation. Now, how do we turn all the cranks so that everybody's winning here, and we're not doing this at the expense of the development community solely, or you know what I'm saying? So,
right.
So it gets pretty complicated with a project like that, but that doesn't mean it's not doable. And like Scott mentioned, hopefully we pick at that a little bit today. So awesome. Well, I'm kind of itching to hear what Catherine's presentation is. I know she's waited patiently, so let's move on to that. Certainly we can circle back around, and if Brian sticks with us, please do. But if you can't, I understand. But certainly more questions could come up. So with that, I'm gonna pass it off on to Catherine, because I think she's got some interesting things to go over for us.
Hey, good to see everyone. Thanks, Rob. I've got a few slides. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. Of course, happy to take them at the end too, but happy to kind of dialogue throughout. I'm going to share my slides here. Let's see, Scott, do you mind enabling screen sharing?
Let's see. Yes, hold on, I'm working on it.
Yeah, no worries. And while Rob's doing that, I'll just say Rob asked me to give the mitigation banker perspective, but I'm going to make a slight edit and say I'm giving the mitigation provider perspective, because as we'll chat about a little bit, mitigation providers really deliver two things. We deliver mitigation bank credits in some cases, and we deliver turnkey project specific restoration in other cases. So I'll just use the more encompassing mitigation provider term. Most mitigation.
I'm sorry. I just want to get the screen shared for you. I think, have you requested it? Because it's not telling me that.
Oh, let's see.
Might have to ask too for me to be able to allow it.
Okay. Yeah, when I hit share screen, it says host has not enabled it. So
let me see here. Hold on.
Let me see.
There you go.
I think I got it figured out.
I'm not sure how to request it. I'm just.
So try again, see if that worked.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Great. We can see.
There we go.
Okay. All right, do you see it in full screen now? Okay, cool. And can you see my cursor moving around? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So what I really wanted to do today is a couple of things. Sort of highlight that really mitigation providers and FILO, there's kind of a synergistic symbiosis, I think, if you will, throughout the state, because number one, the two things working in concert, FILO and then private sector mitigation providers, really, as we heard loud and clear from Brian, what customers want, what permittees want is an availability of options. So having the two having the two options running concurrently gives coverage throughout the state, and I have a map that will probably be the bulk of what we chat about. So FILO is really important where mitigation banks do not exist, either because it's uneconomical to put one there, or perhaps there's a gap in inventory. So perhaps a mitigation bank is there, but it's all sold out and it's waiting for its next credit release. The other symbiosis, if you will, is that FILO is a great source of demand for mitigation providers, right? FILO is a source of demand either to whom we can sell turnkey projects, like the RFPs in the past or the RFP that's out on the street right now, or to whom we can sell bank credits. In turn, I think mitigation providers hopefully help out FILO by being an additional tool in the toolkit. Rob described the enormous credit liabilities that FILO takes on, especially with a really big sale like Amazon. When it sells those advanced credits, I mean, an advanced credit essentially equals a liability, right? Or a requirement to fulfill that credit in the future. So our firm, Ecosystem Investment Partners, and I think it's fair to say all private mitigation providers, see ourselves as a tool in FILO's toolbox to help with that delivery, alongside FILO's traditional design, bid, build projects, which, as I echo George, it's really laudable that FILO has gotten so many projects in the pipeline in Northern Kentucky through its traditional methods, because it's not easy. So really basic overview here, but just to sort of the green shading here highlights for you where private mitigation providers come in. So of course, a permittee has an impact. They could satisfy it in three ways, listed here in rank order of the Corps' preference under the 2008 mitigation hierarchy. So of course, we can sell mitigation bank credits directly to permittees, or if the permittee goes to FILO, then FILO and buys an advanced credit from FILO, then FILO in turn needs to fulfill that advanced credit liability. And they can do it in concert with the private sector by outsourced full delivery or by buying an existing on-the-shelf mitigation bank credit from us. Brian really covered this. So at the risk of duplicating, I'll just sort of give you another way to think about the permittee perspective, at least how we see it when they are our customer. So among these three options, right, that the mitigation, that the permittee is choosing from, availability is always going to be a key factor, right? And the thing about advanced FILO credits is that generally, not everywhere in Kentucky, as we'll see on the map, but generally they're always available. That's why it's so crucial that we have FILO in Kentucky for permittees. Mitigation bank credits depends. They're available if there's a bank there and if the bank's not sold out. Time to permit, that's what we see is often more important than price in a permittee's consideration. Brian put it really well when he said time kills deals. And so having the availability of those credits on the shelf, which both FILO and mitigation banks afford, obviously that's paramount. The price for FILO, both FILO credits and mitigation bank credits, having the price be fixed and known, obviously very beneficial to permittees. And Brian described very well, I thought, the fact that often permittee responsible mitigation is an unknown cost quantity. I will add that because mitigation bank credits, the restoration goes into the ground before the credits are released to us by the Army Corps of Engineers. There is no temporal loss of aquatic resources. Whereas with FILO, which is aggregating credit sales before putting the restoration in the ground, there is a temporal loss of aquatic resources. And therefore the Army Corps in Louisville District adds a 20% temporal loss factor, meaning if a permittee needs 100 mitigation bank credits to satisfy their impacts, they would need 120 in lieu FILO credits to satisfy that same impact. Liability transfer, the regulatory 2008 mitigation rule, hierarchy, and other commercial terms are a big factor too. I'll hit on the other commercial terms because Brian, really emphasized how availability is an issue. So mitigation banks can do creative things with permittees like reserve credits for them, forward contract credits, et cetera, et cetera. Rob and Scott, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of flexibility is something that FILO has much less of, to sort of do those kinds of reservations and commercial terms like that with customers, with permits.
Yes, that's true. We're first come, first serve, offering for whatever we have, and that's pretty much the long and short of it.
As you should be. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So again, just to reiterate what I said before, so private sector mitigation providers, of whom my firm, Ecosystem Investment Partners, we're just one of hundreds and hundreds throughout the country. We are one of a very small handful of firms that works nationally. Many firms are more regional in their approach, but nevertheless, most firms like ours deliver both mitigation banks and turnkey full delivery projects. With mitigation banks, we are spending capital upfront to either acquire land or acquire an easement interest in that land, permit design, and implement the restoration. We then get credits released to us over time. And so we're essentially speculatively developing a restoration project for future unknown customers. And we're selling those credits over time, generally over a time frame of roughly 10 years. It depends how big the bank is and what the average number of sales is. But our firm, we like to come into a market and develop a supply of credits that will serve the market for at least 10 years. So we have a mitigation bank, we're making many transactions over time, many different sales to many different individual customers. Turnkey full delivery, we're doing all the exact same fundamental activities on the ground. There's no difference in terms of what's physically happening on the ground, but from a customer and contracting perspective, we have one known customer, right? The customer is known up front. That customer being FILO, in the case of when we're doing turnkey full delivery for FILO. And the brilliant thing about the way FILO has structured their RFPs is that we get paid essentially the same way we get paid when we do a mitigation bank. So under the FILO RFPs, the mitigation provider does not get paid until a given year's performance standards are completely met, which is essentially exactly the same thing as saying until the turnkey project achieves a credit release. It's technically not a credit release, but for all intents and purposes, we call it a credit release. So we are essentially spending capital and getting paid on exactly the same time frame when we do a mitigation bank and when we do a turnkey project. The main difference is with a turnkey project, we know we've got a locked-in customer from the outset. And of course, that's to the benefit of the customer, to the benefit of FILO, that's at a fixed price. So this map, I want to spend some time on this map. So obviously this is Kentucky, and we've got we got a lot of service area lines going on here. So let me just take a minute to explain that these thicker service area lines are the let's call them original service areas for lack of a better term. And they are the current FILO services under FILO's instrument. Sorry, Rob, did you have a question or a comment? Okay, sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. The lighter shaded gray lines are the new standard service areas for the state of Kentucky, published by the Army Corps of Engineers approximately 2 years ago. So just to be clear, any new FILO project currently will have the old original service areas in the thicker shading. Any mitigation bank project that was approved before 2019 will have the original service areas as well, again, the thicker shading, but any mitigation bank project approved now or recently will have the new service area. So just by way of example, so the Big Sandy service area here, which is, by the way, as you can see on the legend, the only service area in the state that's served only by mitigation credits and not by FILO. We'll talk about Northern Kentucky in a minute. The only reason that Northern Kentucky doesn't show up the exact same way is because I believe, again, please, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys have wetland credits up here. You just don't have stream credits. So this map shows both. If this map was just about stream credits, which are predominantly the ones that are in more demand, then up here, this Northern Kentucky area here would be blue, only serviced by mitigation banks currently.
I think that would be true, except I can't speak for the Northern Kentucky University program, which they may actually have in lieu fee credits to sell there. I know it wouldn't be a large number, but I don't know if they're technically sold out like we are. So I just can't speak to them.
Yeah, great point. Anecdotally, from my conversations with them, they are sold out, but yeah, correct. We would need to account for them as well. So the blue pins on the map are mitigation banks that are approved and operating right now. Our firm EIP owns and operates 5 of them. We have these 2, the Big and Little Sandy mitigation banks, the North Fork mitigation bank, the Stony Creek / Licking River mitigation bank, which was approved 2 weeks ago. That took us 5 years to permit. We can talk more about that. And the rolling fork mitigation bank here is ours as well. Our banks are all stream banks. These private banks out here are wetland banks. These banks over here are relatively small. They are both stream and wetland. And then you can see these pins on the map are old mitigation banks that are sold out. And then the yellow stars are mitigation banks that are currently in the permitting process. So let's just focus here on Northern Kentucky, since that obviously is the place of largest constraint. And we've talked about it a lot today. So the FILO service area is this shape right here. The mitigation bank service area is much bigger. So it is this thin line here, all the way like this, and then all the way out to here. So our bank that was just approved 2 weeks ago, together with these other 2 banks that are in the permitting process, will all service this larger area here. You can see there's a large section of the state that's served by FILO only. That's what I spoke to at the beginning, which is that's the reason that we need all these tools in the toolkit for the benefit of permittees. Why aren't there mitigation banks in these salmon colored areas on the map? Well, largely it comes down to demand. So a mitigation bank has to make an extremely large capital investment upfront, oftentimes many years in advance of when the project starts cash flowing. And if there's not a critical mass of projected future demand to essentially repay that upfront capital investment within a reasonable period of time, then a mitigation banker is not going to be able to put a project there. Again, why FILO is so great, because FILO has the ability to aggregate small bits of demand until there's critical mass, and then go put a project in. Rob and Scott asked me to talk a little bit to how do mitigation banks sort of decide, how do mitigation banks think about where we do projects? Well, we think about demand. And how do we think about that? We look at past permitting history to see, what has been the historic rate of permitted impacts that required mitigation. And then what we really like to think about is the future. So we research what known, what projects are in the permitting process, what known developments are on the horizon, what are the development trends. So, Brian mentioned Kenton County Airport, Amazon facility, and then all the ancillary development that comes around something like that, whether it's other industrial commercial development, whether it's new KYTC roads to service that development, et cetera, et cetera. We also think about land. So where is there available land that has the mineral interests that are not severed that we can acquire? And where is there land that requires restoration, but we're looking for that sweet spot where a property is not so degraded that the restoration is cost prohibitive relative to the amount of credits it will generate. We're looking for that sweet spot where there's cost-effective restoration that will create efficient ecological uplift such that our credit yield or our cost per credit yielded will make it economical to sell, and will make it make sense for a permittee economically to want to buy that credit, as opposed to doing permittee responsible mitigation themselves, or as opposed to paying into the in lieu fee. So we're looking at capital outlay relative to sort of forward projected demand. And we're looking at site efficiency of yield of mitigation credits versus cost per that credit. So really that's the calculus that goes into, whether a private sector firm will come in and develop a mitigation bank or not. Just like for a development project, time kills mitigation deals as well. So the regulatory environment, the ease of getting a mitigation bank permitted, the time to permit for a mitigation bank, those are all big considerations that go in as well. The time to permit for mitigation bank varies greatly across the country in a similar way that it varies on the impact side. There are many factors, whether it's the ecology of the system and how complex it is or whatever. In general, permit timelines for mitigation bank approval are lengthy in the Louisville district. Our Stony Creek Mitigation Bank here in Northern Kentucky that, as I mentioned, just got approved, that took us exactly 5 years to get that mitigation bank approved. So that can be a governor on mitigation bank investment in a geography, is mitigation bankers' perception of how long the approval process will take. Any questions about this this map or what's shown on it?
While people are thinking, just a quick question. You may have said, and I'm sorry, but are the stars that are proposed mitigation banks, are those your alls, or you're just aware of them and their other vendors?
And are they stream and or wetland?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, both of you. So they are not our mitigation banks. These data we pulled down from Rivets, from the Army Corps' online database. So that is how we are aware of those banks, is that they're listed as in permitting on Rivets. We're also just commercially aware of them because, of course, we pay attention to competition and new entrants and so forth. These two banks up here in Northern Kentucky are both stream banks. This mitigation bank in the Upper Cumberland, I'm 99% sure is wetland only. But don't quote me on that, please. I would want to confirm that on Rivets.
Right.
And then these data, these blue pins for other private mitigation banks, again, those are all also directly from Rivets. So this is Army Corps data, if you will, on permitted mitigation banks in Kentucky.
Sure. I will add, and it's notoriously difficult to show all these layers of areas. We struggle with that as well. So if anybody has some questions about that or discomfort, please speak up, because there's a lot packed into one map and stacked on top of each other. So I mean, we kind of always fight that a little bit.
We made multiple versions of this map, and we had all kinds of crazy like crosshatch going on. And finally we realized this was just the simplest scheme. But I think Northern Kentucky is really the most, I mean, again, this here, the original service area, and then this here, the newer one. And Big Sandy, I should note, this is the original service area, and because our mitigation banks were permitted so long ago, they have this grandfathered service area, whereas if those banks were put in today, this here would be their service area. Our North Fork mitigation bank, when it was permitted, this was actually its service area, And we actually did a MBI mod so it actually has the new surface area here.
And does it have only the new, or is it a combination of the two?
It's only the new.
Okay.
Well, correct. That's why this is salmon colored up here, because it's only the
I got you.
new, right? So in lieu fee only services up here now. We have, there are mitigation bank credits on the shelf in inventory at all of these blue pins, except this one right here. So the bank was approved 2 weeks ago. We've submitted a request for our first credit release, the condition of which is that we place the deed restriction and we post our financial assurances. So, and then the Army Corps reviews that and issues us our credits. So we will have about 5,500 stream credits on the shelf in the next month, 2 months, something like that. Here in the Big Sandy, there are about 4,500 credits on the shelf in inventory. Here at North Fork, about 14,000 credits in inventory. And here in the SALT service area, between all these banks, there are roughly 4,400 credits in inventory. These wetland mitigation banks out here have a dozen, 2 dozen-ish, each of them wetland credits in inventory, ballpark. And then all of these blue pins will have future credit releases as well. So those credits that are in inventory that I just ticked off, you know, there will be more credits than that in the future. Just to give you a sense of scale, right? Trust me, I would have loved to do as gigantic as a mitigation bank as possible up here. You know, the constraint being the land that we can find. Our bank here has a total of roughly 27,000 credits in it. The first release will be about 5,500. And, you know, relative to the absorption numbers that Brian mentioned, which 8,000, about 6,000 credits per development, 20,000 credits a year, you know, between our bank and I don't know the credit yields or the projected credit yields of these new banks. They're so new that they don't have that kind of thing shown on rivets yet. I know one of them is a relatively small acreage. Therefore, I'm just guessing it's a relatively small credit yield, but you know, you can see that the mitigation bank credits will be great, but they're not the only solution. So again, why we need FILO. And so those 185,000 credits that Rob's got in the pipeline, right? Rob, once you net out of those, the advanced credits that you've already sold, will you, like net, will you be putting credits back on the shelf? Or will you still have to find more projects to get back into the black, so to speak, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's kind of a combination of both of those things, because like if you had multiple sites in one area, you can only release so much at a time. So,
right,
you know, those projects have probably a 7-year release lifetime with a little bit each year to varying degrees. And that would be just for that first 100,000 that we sold. So, you know, those sales will be releasing credits 5 to 7 years from now still.
right.
So, but as we get the same thing that you talked about, our release schedule is a little different than yours probably, but it may be like a little slower or a little even per year, but whatever we release goes back on the shelf and is available for to be sold again, essentially. So we'll have credits to sell we will be limited to the area you've got outlined there, but we will have credits to sell in that area. The other service areas, you know, that overlap, we already have credits to sell there, but I mean, obviously the kind of the northernmost area is probably the greatest concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just some clarification on that. So with the new service area, because I know these service areas are very confusing. With the new service area in Northern Kentucky, when those service areas are approved, do you reopen to 100,000 worth of credits in that new service area?
I mean, whether or not we adjust our service areas is sort of, that's like an if or indefinite kind of thing. So we're not really even poised to think in those terms yet.
Okay.
You know, so for all intents and purposes, to keep it simple, we have the service areas we have, and you know, we would operate for the foreseeable future that way, which is a little, it kind of unfortunately continues that complication of which service area you're talking about.
Right.
But I would assume, you know, that really the way we look at it from a standpoint of, are we going to sell a credit or not? Do we have it to sell? And is the Corps told the permittee that they can buy it from us? It's really that simple. So, you know, if there's a bank available or if there's other options for their mitigation, that's really between the Corps and the permittee. We don't get into that in the least. It's just, do we have it to sell, and has the Corps directed them to do it with us specifically? So it will never come up that we would be like, hey, you should buy from us instead of that bank. Because it would be our preference that if there's a bank, that is absolutely utilized first. I mean, that's just the long and short of it. That's in line with the rule. That's in line with, you know, the banking objectives, the permittee objectives, frankly, the restoration objectives. So, I mean, that's all well and good. You know, we would like that.
Right. And there's usually always a preference for banks anyway, you know, with the hierarchy of the mitigation rule. But, you know, obviously there's a supply issue. And I guess I asked it from the context of, is that supply issue on the verge of going away just because those new boundaries are going to create advanced credit sales that are available to sell again? But it sounds like the answer is not really.
Well, not that we would be able to describe and sort of manage right now today, or maybe even in the short term, to be honest. It does pose kind of an odd issue where if we had credits to sell in our Northern Kentucky area, and that is much closer to an impact site, or much more, like say it's in the same drainage or same county, for example, then the EIP bank that's available overlapping that, I'm just pointing out that there is an issue there that may be of concern. We don't have an influence over any decisions about that issue, but we're aware of that sort of oddity, I guess is what you would call that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Rob. Right. And I think the key distinction is whether you're selling an advance credit or an in lieu fee released credit. Right. So if you're selling credit that's out of the pool of the 100,000 credits that the Army Corps issued you sort of upfront, right, those credits are very clearly underneath, if you will, or number two on the preference hierarchy, right? Yes. So yes. Let's just say there was, an impact right here. An advanced FILO credit versus a credit out of this bank. The credit out of this bank would be number one according to the preference hierarchy. But once the in lieu fee has actual sites in the ground, and those in lieu fee sites are releasing credits, those credits from a hierarchy perspective are functionally equivalent to a mitigation bank credit. Right. So in that case, potentially, distance from the impact, although that's not supposed to be a factor, right? Service area is supposed to be the governing factor. You know, credit type, that's not really a factor in Kentucky because they're all stream credits. They're not split out further. But anyways, I think that that's a key distinction in that question, is whether the in lieu fee credit is advanced or released.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I pointed it out just because I wanted to let people know that we are aware of that, number one. And number two, we don't have influence over that decision and don't even really want to be a part of it. So, you know, our objective is to, you know, like you've said, to aggregate those sales and do good projects as quickly as we possibly are allowed. And that's kind of the end of it. So, but there is a lot that has to happen at the core level, at the permitting level, making those decisions. If there are equivalencies or perceived, you know, kind of, if they have decisions to make, you know, I don't think it's subjective. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying it's not, we don't have influence, you know, and hopefully it's all cut and dry and everybody's happy about it, but you know, that's not always the world we live in.
Yeah, totally understood. It makes a lot of sense, everything you're saying. I think ultimately at the end of the day, right, it comes down to an economic decision by the permittee as well, right? What's going to be, you know, what's going to be the most cost effective, most expeditious, most expedient, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But
I think based on what, you know, Brian acknowledged as far as the cost of that credit, it's probably safe to make an assumption that the cost per credit of being bound to that northern 9 counties versus where your site is would allow you to be like extremely price competitive, if not, like it wouldn't even be close. I would expect, but there's a lot of conjecture there because all I know is our price.
yeah,
Yours is what it is.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of reasons that, in general, mitigation bank credits can be priced lower than in lieu fee credits. Right, number one is the temporal loss factor I mentioned. Just, you know, if on a function like net, because you have to buy more in lieu fee credits than you do bank credits, you know, that's already effectively the bank credits are more cost effective, even if they're the same sticker price. The next reason is, you know, you guys are doing this tremendous conjecture exercise where you need to price your credits to account for future unknowns, inflation, yada, 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 yada. But you're pricing your credits without knowing what your site is. Whereas we have the advantage of pricing our credits knowing exactly what our site is. And then sometimes, not always, there can be an economy of scale, right? So if you only have a certain amount of dollars or something to do a smaller site, we can, a mitigation bank might elect to speculatively do a larger site, spreading the fixed costs out over more credits, and that brings the average price per credit down. So, you know, there are a lot of things that affect pricing, but just in general, those are some of the reasons why there are price differentials between in lieu fee credits and mitigation bank credits.
Right.
And this is just the last slide. I just have some, you know, thoughts about going forward. Again, from a private mitigation provider perspective, you know, what are some things that would help us be able to bring more stuff online faster in Kentucky? Well, it helps us because it helps permittees ironically, it helps us, right? If FILO is able to throughput projects faster. Because as Brian described in Northern Kentucky, if the dynamic is that developers are choosing to go elsewhere because of a lack of any kind of mitigation, that doesn't help any of us. So one thing I was thinking, there's a national allowance in the regulations that state agencies are allowed to, if they pay for it, they're allowed to have a dedicated USACE permit reviewer. That might be something, obviously you guys have looked into this before, I'm sure this is not like new news, but if that is one idea that could enhance the throughput of the Corps' ability to review your projects, as well as the turnkey projects that private providers are doing for you, right? Like if we were doing a turnkey project for you, it would be great to have a dedicated FILO permit reviewer to make the process, as efficient as possible. That's one idea. Another idea is one that we talked about at the last work group session, which is private mitigation providers are hugely supportive of any procurement rule changes, tweaks, whether it's a statutory change or not, whatever the simplest, most efficient fix is. But as we talked about extensively at the last work group, it seems like FILO would really benefit from a fix to the procurement regs that would make your procurement from the private sector of full delivery projects and mitigation bank credits more of a capital project and less of a commodity project. And so, that would help you guys, it would help us, ease our ability to be a vendor to you. And so, that seems like a really high priority, and, the private sector sort of stands at the ready to be helpful in any way on that. And then, of course, just in closing, from the private provider perspective, increasing the volume and rate of full delivery RFPs and bids or putting out mitigation bank credit bid solicitations. We welcome that with open arms. The Upper Cumberland one on the street is great. More of those the private sector would love to see, because as I described earlier in my slides, the thing about those is that we know who our customer is. We have a locked in customer. And so of course they're very price competitive. We're competing against all of our fellow mitigation providers, but that's good for FILO. Competition is good for FILO. So it gets you the best price. So we'd love to see more of those. And that's really the universe of, from our perspective, what would be helpful. So anyways, happy to take more questions, discuss, whatever.
I appreciate that. That's really, really informative and helpful. And I want to point out your enthusiasm, and I really appreciate that probably the most of all, because positive enthusiasm these days is in high demand, let's say. So I don't want to delay or speak over any questions. So certainly, if anybody has any other questions, we could pose to Catherine directly based on this or any other, really anything at all. Please do. George, did you have something?
Yeah, I did have one question. So I'm just curious, Catherine, if you could put like one or two things, because there are, there are areas where we don't see a lot of banks, and maybe the banking environment in Kentucky is not as competitive as it is in other states. What's the one or two things that, if you would just point your finger to, this is why?
Predictable demand is number one. Predictable permit process is
Okay.
number two.
Yep.
I think that's fair on both counts. I will say that from a standpoint of, as we do our projects and even those full delivery projects, which are not entirely at arm's length as we go through that, because we do remain with those, the methodology we have now, we remain the sponsor, and I'm assuming we would in any other version of it as well. So we retain a lot of responsibility for that project and as we go through. So we have a staff that, you know, we've worked very hard here to sort of compensate for what you mentioned in your first bullet on this slide, is where we don't have a dedicated mitigation reviewer person for all of Kentucky that covers all districts, or how like KYTC does. We have people here that we try to really garner as much consistency with all of our projects, what we submit to the Corps and regulatory agencies, to try to help provide, at least for our projects, some version of consistency and predictability. So we're shepherding that. We're also, you know, providing review and feedback to really funnel everything such that they're, you know, it's not a big surprise from project to project for the reviewers when they get it. So we have definitely thought about that. So that, you know, like you said, speak to that one point of consistency with permitting. I'll go ahead and add that this is something that I think is good to keep on the table, and probably the lowest hanging fruit that I'm aware of, rather than fighting with federal and state agencies about their regulations and how they administer them. You know, this is a positive extension of what we could do. I think really at the end of the day that the big question would be, you know, is that a fair use of mitigation funds? And then if it's in lieu fee mitigation funds, would that same staff person per se be allowed to do other mitigation projects funded by the in lieu fee mitigation fund? So there's some technical problems that could be an issue going forward with that, and how that would actually look. And I don't know what, you know, the capabilities of the Corps are, but certainly kind of as a side or parallel to this, we would welcome that discussion, you know, going forward. I think there's a, you know, at least to flesh it out, see if there are hurdles or pitfalls to that, what those are. But I think that's definitely on the table. And that would go really, really far as that consistency aspect with permitting. And it just, my pie in the sky version of it is we have one person for the state, even though we have multiple core districts. I don't know that that's possible, but that I'm just saying that's my pie in the sky version, just for that kind of consistency. With regard to the market of it, I would say that, you know, looking at our annual sales numbers, pretty much in all service areas, Northern Kentucky is the only one where you would expect an annual sale at all. We have many, even recent years, where there's zero sales in our service area for the whole entire calendar year. So we have that much volatility in Kentucky, depending on where you happen to be looking at any given time. And you know, and that's part of the reason why banks can't prepare. And like Catherine was saying, gives value to this program, is that if a permittees usually need to make their payment like right now. Like, oh, we're ready. We need to make a payment. We need to make a payment. It's not often that you get a lot of lead time. Definitely not the amount of lead time that a bank would need to develop and then also release those credits. So as a bank, now they could do like a PRM version, but that sort of extends the permit time and get into all that technicality, you know, and that's the value of the inlet fee program, and really why we would like to modify or improve the full delivery solicitation process so that we can be essentially immediately responsive. You know, as soon as we have enough funding to do what the market would consider to be a viable project, or we're up against our 3-year timeline or whatever that may be, we can issue whatever we need and the market can respond right then. And they have a guaranteed, you know, as long as they do their job, they get paid, you know. So, and that's really what we're looking at. The buying bank credits is a little bit different animal. for a lot of reasons that I don't know that I would be happy to discuss, but I don't know about if we got to dive that deep right this minute. So anyway, that's to kind of add to your question, George, it's kind of hard to explain because there's a lot going on from a lot of different angles. But that's my take on it for now. But does anybody else have any more questions for Catherine?
Catherine, I want to talk about bullet number 4. Can you go back and pull up the map of the state?
Yeah.
Okay. Bullet number 4 comes into play when there's a bank established. That becomes the condition precedent. So when you look at the central Kentucky, all the way into the Cumberlands, the upper and lower, the question becomes, what obstacles does a bank have? And in order to reach number 4, a bank has to be established. So what are the issues that banks deal with in even establishing these areas? Is it mineral? Is it property? Is it willing sellers? Is it, you know, well, nobody's building there, so there's no even reason to establish a bank there. So what are the obstacles that the banks deal with in those areas?
Yeah. The obstacles are how I answered George's question. So the obstacles are, number 1, predictable demand, and number 2, predictable permit timeline. So in these regions where you don't see mitigation banks, it's primarily because of those 2 reasons. You know, mitigation providers are, we have on our small 17-person staff, we have 4 people who just work on real estate all day. So that's, real estate is the core competency of many mitigation providers. And so the ability to find land that doesn't have severed mineral interests, work with sellers and turn sellers into willing sellers, and then actually reach deals and get land control, that is not a limiting factor in general in these geographies. I'm not going to say it's easy. You know, it took us a year to find these properties here in Big Sandy, but those things you listed, Scott, are generally not the constraints from a private sector provider perspective. And I think that's why ideally, you know, in some cases, it makes sense for FILO to partner with the private sector. So to answer your question about, you know, why aren't there more mitigation banks? When we develop a mitigation bank, it's to service the retail market. We don't necessarily think of FILO as part of that retail market, right? Because the retail market is all about forward, future-looking impacts. Mm-hmm. FILO is essentially past impacts. So, you know, servicing FILO is terrific, but it's not necessarily the driving factor to establishing a mitigation bank. If a bank doesn't already exist, a private restoration provider is going to want to work with FILO in a turnkey, project-specific solicitation, not necessarily by developing a mitigation bank.
So if the turnkey procurement methodology was tweaked and improved, would you see that being the partnership going forward, as opposed to, if that becomes the methodology, would you even see banks in those areas continue? What would the incentive be for them to even be developed when the turnkey vending production would be the way to go?
Well, the incentive is if, right, there's enough demand beyond FILO. So then that's kind of win-win for everyone, right? Where FILO can get its needs met, and then there's credits for other permittees going forward. So that's one scenario, right? In places like where there are already established mitigation banks, like in Big Sandy, right? I guess the factor would just be time, right? It'll be so FILO could satisfy its outstanding liabilities so much faster by buying mitigation bank credits that are already on the shelf versus the several year process to do a turnkey solicitation. It would just shorten FILO's compliance time in areas where there are already mitigation banks. But yeah, to answer your question, you know, in areas where there aren't already mitigation banks, it depends on the private provider's assessment of the future market, right? And like how big the FILO demand is relative to that future market demand. And in some cases, it's going to make more sense to do a single turnkey project. In other cases, it might make sense to tack on a bank. But I think the key difference is, right, at the point of solicitation with FILO, if it's turnkey project, right, we know we have the customer. Whereas if we were to just speculatively put a bank here, it would take us multiple years to get it approved, and then maybe FILO would or wouldn't, want to procure those credits in the future. That makes sense. So that the advantage to the bank, to the mitigation provider of the turnkey solicitation is that you know you have that locked in demand right up front.
Right.
So just circling back to confirm something. So what you're saying though, is what you said earlier in Eastern Kentucky, that severed minerals is not an issue for banks in finding property?
I didn't say it's not an issue. It's not the number one. Eastern Kentucky, of all the places in Kentucky, right? Eastern Kentucky for sure. Several severed minerals are an issue. You know, we've had sites we thought were going to work and then they didn't because of severed minerals. But in general, you know, those are things that we can overcome by just being, you know, searching high and low for the right project.
Well, something that I'd like to do now, and I don't want to cut it short because I'm really, truly enjoying the interaction and the information. I think it's really helpful, but we are closing in on kind of our meeting time. I'm happy to discuss more after. Please reach out to me. We can brainstorm and maybe bring this to the next meeting. But I think kind of a good segue from Catherine's information to where we're going would be to pose this question to you. And you may not be able to speak on behalf of all banks, but if you can, please do. How much of a benefit would it be with these turnkey projects that the department is the end owner of that conservation, you know, that legal conservation part of it, the site protection instrument? How much of a benefit is that? Is it make, I'm not that it's make or break, but does it make certain sites or make the viability of turnkey projects, the ability to have more vendors, is that a big factor or is it no factor or somewhere in between?
It's a neutral factor, just in a vacuum.
Right.
But if FILO's ability to have an interest in that land helps facilitate their procurement in the first place, then it's a very positive factor. Does that answer make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think I would say, you know, right now that turnkey project is prohibited from us doing that. But I've heard frequently from people in the mitigation industry of like, you know, like Brian mentioned, like it's a big cost at the end. And there's sort of a, okay, what do we do now? We did this mitigation project. Here we have this property that has to be conserved forever and anon. Who's taking care of that? Who's enforcing that? Who's doing that now? So, I mean, I think we've been very clear up to now that, you know, that is of interest to us, especially if it can also be public access, recreational property, things of that nature. It doesn't have to be, but, you know, is there the potential for us to be the end user, not just the funder, but the end user? And the enforcement of those, whatever easement or fee simple or whatever it is, does that make the ability of you as a vendor or your competitor as a vendor to dive into that easier? Because you're not worried about what you're going to do at the end, what that escrow is going to be to cover long-term management. Any of those questions with regard to enforcement of that site protection instrument down the road are gone. Does that by itself, I mean, how significant is that really is what I'm getting at? Like,
Yeah, again, I would say it's neutral. In other words, if it's beneficial to FILO, because there are co-benefits for you of having an interest in the property, like it meets your mandate for public access or your mandate to add hunting lands or something like that, then that's great. And we're very happy to do it that way. But we're also very happy to figure out the disposition of the land, to negotiate the appropriate amount of the financial assurances and so forth, you know, with the Army Corps. Like those are things we do as private restoration providers. Those are things we do all day long on all of our other projects. And so, and in Kentucky, we've worked with deed restrictions. So, you know, that obviates the need for a third-party easement holder. But anyways, so again, we're very happy to have FILO have an interest in the land. That would be great if it provides additional benefits to FILO that are even beyond the provision of the mitigation. But it's not an absolute necessity from our perspective.
all right, good. I think that's helpful. Okay, well, I think we could probably forego. I mean, Scott, you may want to make some closing comments, but you know, kind of
Let's just bring up where we're at.
yeah, I'm gonna just very quickly bear with us here. I'm trying to share different. I think this is it. Kind of we had our placeholders. This one.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, here's kind of the timeline where we're at going forward. The General Assembly convenes on January 4th. The last day for bill request is February 22nd. The last day for new House bills is the 28th. March 2nd is the last day for new Senate bills. The 29th and 30th is concurrent days, with veto days being the 31st through April 12th. They leave town on the 14th, and on the 16th, we get to go out and kill a bird. Probably needed. But that's the timeline we're dealing with. We're up against the holidays, as we all are aware, with everything in people taking time off and people taking vacation. We've had a request from Representative Massey trying to get a date on the calendar as soon as possible for the next meeting. And we're looking at doing the next meeting either the Thursday or Friday of the second week of January, which would be the 13th or 14th.
Yeah.
So that being said, we've heard a lot of good things from Brian today. We appreciate Catherine. We've heard from Tim Baumgartner, and who gave the last presentation of the last meeting, and we're continuing to work with them on different potential legislative ideas. We are a long way from having any type of finished product, and everything is still kind of spitballing, and we're throwing, trying to put things together that we think would work. What we would like to hear directly from the group is by January 7th, if there are concrete ideas or concrete proposals, legislative language that you all think would be beneficial. I know we talked about minerals in the past. There are certain states that deal with sunsetting minerals with and the ability for quiet title for land acquisitions. Is there anything to incentivize landowners to be willing to sell or make land available for mitigation? If there are things that we would like to have done, or you think would be beneficial to the process going forward, we would request that you submit that to us by January 7th. That would give us time to fold it into anything that we would be preparing and would like to discuss on the 14th. I will also, this is the commercial announcement that I have to remind everybody, Rob and I are state employees, and we are members of the Fish and Wildlife Department and the executive branch, the Tourism Cabinet, which is the executive branch government. We can talk about language and drafting legislation all we want, but it can't be our two ideas that get submitted. It has to go through the vetting process for government. That's the entity we have to deal with. So that's why we were saying, if there are things you have out there that you'd like for us to consider and fold it in, please get it to us by the 7th.
I would expand that too as well to say, if you'd like to have a discussion about it, obviously if you had something concrete, like Scott mentioned, this specific provision could be different, X, Y, and Z, absolutely, that would be perfect. But even if it's just more an inclination or a question, because, there's going to be a little bit of a race at the beginning of January to get all this organized, to make sure it's viable. If there's any sort of suggestion that would end up being a legislative action of that nature. Now, that said, that's not all we can do. There's other things, maybe there's some policy things that we can do, or maybe we can accomplish an end result a different way. I think the door's open on that as well. I'll say this because I thought we might, and we did. We kind of ran up against our time here for today, but what we might try and do is some of the questions or topics that we thought, if we got to them, we would present today. Maybe we'll present those in an email to the group and kind of do a, sort of a email banter to help facilitate some ideas for people, but don't wait for that. If you got something, that's your idea, then please reach out. If you don't want to type it, give me a call, I'll type it, one of those things. You're in the car thinking of it, whatever. Like I said, there could be a lot of ground to cover in this short period of time. And I don't think, it seems like all of a sudden we're rushing, but I don't think it's that. I think we just took what we've been through to get to where we are to take the next step forward. Because I think everybody in this work group now has had the opportunity to hear and formulate their own ideas and kind of come to terms with what is mitigation, what does this need in this state, what are the intricacies of the processes for different perspectives. And without that, you would have had a blind spot going forward. So I appreciate Catherine and Brian and everybody that's spoken up to this point in that regard, because I think it's the collective that we need to move forward with, and that's our intention. So like I said, I think it would be safe if we close the meeting for now. If anybody has any questions, we don't have to stop it short. We can hang on as long as you guys really want to. But I also don't want to burn up everybody's day in here. So, you know, questions now, let's have them. Let's have it out, you know, discuss whatever, or we will follow up. I'll resend everybody the links. Hopefully the live stream's recorded. Well, I know it is because it's live streaming. So we'll have that out there that people can review. The previous 2 meetings are also on the live stream, available to view and collect your notes and thoughts. And, you know, we'll reach out to the group and maybe even some individuals with some ideas to kind of bounce around and see if we can converge on something that, you know, really truly everybody has a piece, has a part in it, and everybody benefits from. So with that, are there any kind of closing questions or remarks? Anybody like to speak up? I think we're all probably tired at this point, but it has been good. A lot of brainwave activity. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it down. I appreciate everybody's time today, and we'll be sending out information. So stay tuned and keep your thinking caps on.
I hope everybody has a great holiday.
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
I figured turkey season was self-explanatory.
Oh, it's fine.